Hello. Through the early days of formula racing, teams could enter with no factory support from a big car company and still succeed. Williams, Jordan, and arguably Ligier are flagship examples, winning tons of races and even championships in their time in the sport, basically on their own. But by the 1990s and into the 2000s, the age of the privateers and independents began to die. Jordan got bought out by the Midland Group and later Spyker, the Dutch car brand. Ligier died off completely. Williams became BMW's works team. But in the mid-90s, the privateers had their last hurrah. The next few videos will concern the last few back-of-grid strugglers that struck it out on their own for the mid-1990s. Let's start with this one. Today, we talk about the story of Italy's last privateer, Forti. Forti, like Onyx before them on this channel, can trace its roots back to the lower formula ladder. The team was founded by former racing driver Guido Forti and engineer Paolo Guerci, and started in the European Formula Ford in 1977, where their driver, future Indy 500 pole sitter Teo Fabi, would win the title handily, beating drivers such as Andrea De Cesaris and Enzo Coloni. Their immediate success in Formula Ford sparked a climb up to Italian Formula 3, where they would stay for 10 years. They were incredibly competitive there too, with a ton of talent coming through in their years in F3, such as Riccardo Patrese, Elio De Angelis, and Ivan Capelli. From 1986 to 1989, they won the Drivers' Championship 3 straight times with Enrico Bertaggia, Emanuele Naspetti, and Gianni Morbidelli. All 3 of these drivers would end up in Formula 1 in some capacity, so it looked like Forti had an eye for talent, at least at this level. They made the jump to Formula 3000 in 1988, and they originally struggled. Enrico Bertaggia would DNQ for 6 of the 11 rounds that year, and they scored no points with a best finish of P7 at Monza. This was down to the fact that instead of running a Reynard or Lola chassis like everybody else, they commissioned Dallara to build a chassis for them, and they didn't do a good job. After they switched to Lola, they got faster as the years went on, and by 1991 they were fighting for championships. In 1992, they were leading the points with Emanuele Naspetti, but he was poached mid-season to drive for Leighton House to replace Paul Belmondo. Naspetti's replacement, Andrea Montermini, would win 2 races to finish P2 in the standings behind Luca Badoer. These 2 names will come up soon, trust me. After their success along the steps of the ladder, Forti made the decision to move that one step further and enter the pinnacle of European motorsports. In the words of YG Rob, started from the bottom, now we way up. Guido Forti was an ambitious man, but he wasn't deluded. He recognized that the world of Formula 1 is incredibly treacherous without the big bucks from big car companies. He wanted to keep his team as Italian as possible, but that seemed easier said than done. There was only one car manufacturer that was willing and able to support a Formula 1 team at the time: Fiat. The only real problem was that Fiat already owned a team: Ferrari. There was Lamborghini, but they had pulled out from Formula 1 after 1993 after McLaren rejected their V12 engines. Now, we're going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but this will come up later towards the end. Stick with me on this. McLaren and Honda ended their partnership after 1992, and McLaren was in need of a new engine supplier. While they ran with a Ford V8 stopgap for 1993, Ron Dennis went to Chrysler Corp in Detroit to talk about Lamborghini engines, which had been seen with the likes of LaRousse, Lotus, Ligier, and Minardi through the late 80s and into the early 90s. McLaren wanted to use their engines, and Chrysler wanted to see their engines be competitive, so Dennis and Bob Lutz made a handshake deal to put Lambo engines in a McLaren car for a testing session. Ayrton Senna tested the new McLambo, as it was called, and he absolutely loved it. He made one recommendation of change, though: sacrifice the power at the top end to beef up the power in the middle rev range. Now, normally the designer of the engine, former Ferrari mechanic Mauro Forghieri, would never do such a thing, but since he respected Senna's opinion so much, he did what he said, and despite losing 20 horsepower up top, it gained 40 in the middle to reach a maximum of 750 horsepower. It was now more powerful than the V12 that Ferrari was running, and it was on par horsepower-wise with the Renault engines that Williams was running. It was much more stable and to drive and easier on the tires than the Fords they eventually used, but that wasn't important to Senna. He got the power that he wanted. But, at the same time, Ron Dennis was a lot farther along than a handshake deal with Peugeot. It's alleged that due to this, Ron Dennis attempted to sabotage the McLambo test by putting more than enough fuel in to bog the car down, but it was just incredibly fast naturally, especially with a talent like Ayrton Senna behind the wheel. Former McLaren engineer Ian Wright said in an interview that the Lambo engine was surely fast enough to win the double for McLaren by some margin. Unfortunately, McLaren signed the deal with Peugeot for 1994, and as a stopgap for the rest of 1993, they ran with a Cosworth V8. Senna was incredibly disappointed in this decision and committed to leaving McLaren for Williams at the end of that year. Alright, back to Forti, cue Brightman again, let's go. With Fiat busy running Ferrari, Chrysler unwilling after the Lambo failure, and nobody else that really minted enough to support, Forti looked outside of Italy for their savior. Thankfully, they got their man, Mr. Abilio Diniz, Brazilian supermarket magnate. He was the owner of the Asacar Group, which is essentially Brazilian Walmart. He also had a son, named Pedro, who wanted to get into Formula 1. He started racing at the age of 18, which is, really old for getting your start. For reference, Lance Stroll, Jaime Alguersuari, and Max Verstappen were all getting their start in Formula 1 at that age. Starting in karts at 18 might as well be 81, but when your dad's the owner of Brazil's biggest supermarket chain, the world's your oyster. The Diniz family and Forti had some history, as Pedro raced for the team in F3000 in 1993. Forti got his money, and Diniz got his easy path to Formula 1. Through Diniz, Forti met Carlo Gancia, heir to the Gancia Wine Company and one of Diniz's business partners, who bought out all of Paolo Guerci's shares in the team and gave him a much-needed injection of cash, and gave Diniz a way into the team legally. As a shareholder in the team, Gancia and Diniz got the job of negotiating sponsors for the team. In a clever move, he brought on companies that he knew he could sell at his stores, and the ones that he got on board got preferential product placement, ranging from local products such as Parmalat Dairy and the generic food company Sadia, to more recognizable names like Duracell batteries and Gillette razors. Since the Diniz family was so involved in the team, it was a foregone conclusion that Pedro was signed first. Abilio wanted a second Brazilian in the car, and they had quite a few options. Christian Fittipaldi was approached, coming off a year racing for Footwork Arrows, but he took his money to kart. Mauricio Gugelmin, formerly of Leighton House and Jordan and recently having moderate success with Dick Simon and Chip Ganassi, was also approached, but he also turned them down, signing for Pac West Racing in kart. Gil de Ferran, third-place finisher in International Formula 3000 the previous year, also talked to the team, but he also took his money to North America, racing for Derek Walker and later Roger Penske, you guessed it, in kart. They eventually settled on Roberto Moreno, formerly of AGS, Coloni, Eurobrun, Andrea Moda, and Minardi, to drive. With Diniz's McDuck-esque fortune, they had about $17 million in reserve for car development, putting them ahead of basement teams like LaRousse, Minardi, Pacific, and Simtech on the budget front. It also helped that they didn't have to pay for engines. They acquired Ford V8s through sponsorship from Ford Brazil, who paid for the engines out of their own pockets. With this money, they developed the Forti FG01, a very conservative design that was, how you say, outdated and overweight. It was the first time Forti had to design its own car in accordance with FIA law. It was about as aerodynamic as a cow, and it had an older H-pattern pedal-activated gearbox, the last of its kind. Everything was put together. Bring on the debut of the Yellow Devils. Forti was the newest team to show up for preseason testing at Estoril, where Pedro Diniz was 4 seconds slower than Nigel Mansell's McLaren, the next slowest car on the timing sheets. Ouch. If it's any consolation, they wouldn't have to pre-qualify as there were less than 30 entrants. In fact, all they had to do was set a lap and they'd be in the 26-car field, as LaRousse went bankrupt and shut down before 1995 started. The first race of the year was the Brazilian Grand Prix back then. A car with 2 local drivers painted in Brazil's national colors had to have been a hit with the locals. With Forti's budget, you would think they'd be fighting with the likes of Terrell, Ligier, and Sauer, but then qualifying ended. Moreno lined up 23rd, and Diniz 25th. Ouch. Instead of the mid-pack, as they had hoped, Forti was condemned to the basement. Come race day, though, the car proved itself to be reliable, Moreno was running well before he spun off, and Diniz managed to finish in P10. Just ignore the fact that he was 7 laps down. The Argentine Grand Prix went even worse. They qualified in 24th and 25th, only beating Taki Inoue's footwork arrows on pace. Moreno was 11.2 seconds behind David Coulthard's pole time, and Diniz was another second behind that, although you can't explain that with it was raining. Both cars finished the race, but they weren't classified as they didn't complete 90% of the race distance. Damon Hill, the race winner, lapped them both 9 times. Domenico Sciattarella in the Simtech lapped them 5 times. In the span of 2 races, everything has gone totally pear-shaped for Forti. The team got a little better luck going forward. Simtech folded after Monaco, so they got more prize money per race as less cars showed up. After France, the FIA introduced a new rule for the 1996 season, the 107% rule. We mentioned this in the Lola video, but we might as well talk about it again. Only the drivers that can make it within 107% of the pole sitter's qualifying time were allowed to start the race. As you can see by this conveniently made graph, Forti had yet to get within 109% all year, let alone 107%. So, they shaved 60 kilograms off the chassis and began developing a sequential pedal gearbox that was allegedly able to compensate for a half a second a lap, which was never completed. They did kind of speed up towards the end of the year, and by the season finale at Adelaide, Diniz had given the team its best finish of P7. Under the current system, that would have been worth a few points, but under the old system it was just barely outside. Forti Corse ended the season with 0 points, classified in P11 in the constructors' standings. The off-season before 1996 could be seen as nothing less than a disaster. Pedro Diniz left for Ligier, taking his dad's money with him. Roberto Moreno, having seen this movie before, quit soon after, and both seats were filled by Footwork Arrows' Andrea Montermini and Minardi's Luca Badoer. See, I told you these names would come up again. They were slated to get V10 engines from Ford, the same ones that Sauber got in 1996, before Diniz left, but then afterwards they had to settle for the ECA Zetec R V8, the same ones used by Sauber in 1995. They had to delay the development of the new car until midway through the 1996 season, so they had to bear it out with the old, fat, slow FG01B. At least they got that flappy paddle gearbox they wanted. Both cars DNQ'd for the season opener at Albert Park, but they made the grid for both Brazil and Argentina. At that Argentine Grand Prix, Badoer got into an accident with who else but Pedro Diniz that ended in him getting sent to a barrel roll. Thankfully, he was okay. At Monaco, they got their new car, the FG03 for some reason, and then the team went from incredibly slow with a lot of money to somewhat slow with no money. They reduced the amount of times per race they were lapped, which isn't much improvement, but it's improvement nonetheless. They made the grid in the final 2 slots at Montreal and Magny-Cours, but didn't finish. There were rumors after Monaco that Forti would not survive in 1997 without a buyout. Said buyout would come in the form of a mystery investor known as the Shannon Group. Shannon Racing was a team that burst onto the scene directly into Formula 3000 earlier that year and has enough background shady dealings to warrant its own video, but I'll attempt to tell a mildly abridged version of the story. Shannon Group was headed by a convicted fraudster that had links to Silvio Berlusconi, former Italian prime minister, noted sex pest, and alleged mafioso. This man founded an investment firm known as FinFirst, and defrauded its clients enough to buy a Russian helicopter company and relocated to Shannon, Ireland, hence the name, the Shannon Group. They took over running of the Danielson engineering team in F3000 and F3, only showing up for 2 races in F3000 with Tom Christensen and Luca Rangoni, scoring 4 points and even a pole at the Po Grand Prix before getting in touch with Guido Forti and withdrawing, which seems suspicious, just pulling the plug on the lower Formula ventures out of the blue like that. The Shannon-Forti deal was announced by the owner of the company that did composite work with the FG01, which was now completely unrelated to either party. It's alleged by many that they only made the announcement because Forti still owed them for the composite work that they had done. It was said that Shannon had gotten themselves a 51% stake in the team, but Forti disputed this, saying that they had not paid him a dime. The team withdrew due to lack of funds after Britain, and Forti took Shannon Group to court looking to wrestle control of the team away from them. The judge didn't see the point of the case as the team was broke, so they awarded the case to Shannon. The team officially kicked the bucket in September, before the season had ended. As one last punch to the gut, Forti had signed the 1997 Concord Agreement, which would have given the team a chance of survival due to the split of TV revenue they would get. Now, with all of that out of the way, how do you think it would have gone down in a parallel universe? Take it back now, y'all. Wait, I hear you saying. We went too far. Why did we stop in 1993? The team didn't get its start in Formula 1 until 1995. Remember the tangent we went on about McLaren testing Lambo engines? Yeah, this is where that comes in. In this universe, the McLambo test happens pre-season, and Ron Dennis fulfills Ayrton Senna's wishes and commits to running with Lambo engines for the 1993 season. With McLaren money, they straighten out all the reliability kinks seen in the engine's backmarker days, and Ayrton Senna cruises to his 4th World Drivers' Championship. This means that he stays with McLaren for 1994 onwards instead of moving to Williams. So, yes, Ayrton Senna lives through 1994 in this hypothetical. I'm not going to fantasy book the entirety of 1994, that seems like too much work, but here are the cliff notes. With Senna not going to Williams, they call up David Coulthard to start 1994. Unfortunately, I don't think that Senna's move will affect JJ Lehto's neck injury, so Jos Verstappen will start the season alongside Michael Schumacher at Benetton. In the wake of less injuries and death, the drivers' market will be a whole lot less turbulent throughout the year. More teams get by through the season with the same 2 drivers they started with. There is one massive change, though. Benetton's Option 13 scandal ends in more than just a fine. They get excluded from the championship entirely. Flavio Briatore gets banned from the sport, and Michael Schumacher's name takes a hit in Formula 1 circles due to a belief that he was kind of complicit. While it would be easy to say that Senna goes back-to-back here, we'll give the 1994 World Drivers' Championship to Damon Hill, since he would finish P2 in real life. Damon Hill wins, Senna finishes P2, Gerhard Berger P3, Mika Hakkinen P4. We move onward to 1995, where Forti is just getting its start in Formula 1. Lamborghini, coming off its recent success supplying engines for McLaren, looks to enter F1 with a works team. Forti, in the quest of keeping things as Italian as possible, is a natural choice to invest in. Alongside post-Iacocca Chrysler money, Abilio Diniz's fortune is retained from the real-life timeline as he also invests in the team. Pedro is signed to drive one car, but in the quest for an Italian representative, they pass up Vincenzo Sospiri in favor of the guy that finished one place behind him in the 1994 F3000 season. Max Papis is given his start in F1 with Forti Lamborghini. I would assume the Lambo cars would kind of look like what Minardi had in 1992 when they were powered by a Lambo V12, just with a lighter shade of yellow to match Diniz's supermarket chain. With the absolute mountain of money to work with between Chrysler and Diniz, Forti Lambo is exactly where they wanted to be IRL, fighting mid-pack with Ligier, Jordan, and Sauber, scoring quite a few points, let's say enough for 6th in the constructor standings. Benetton takes a step back, and Schumacher does not win the World Drivers' Championship. He doesn't even finish top 5. Instead, Ayrton Senna takes his 5th World Drivers' Championship, finally besting his longtime rival Alain Prost. 1996 shows off an expansive butterfly effect. Michael Schumacher's contract expires at Benetton, and instead of going to Ferrari, he takes a 1-year prove-it deal with Ligier. David Coulthard takes his spot at Benetton alongside Jean Alesi. Gerhard Berger, as a consequence, stays at Ferrari. Ayrton Senna's contract expires with McLaren after 1995, and although he just won a World Drivers' Championship with the team, he wishes to move elsewhere. Not only does he not agree with the decision to switch to Mercedes power, to him, he's fulfilled his goal, he's done his art, and now it's time for him to do his money's work. For the 1996 Formula 1 season, Scuderia Ferrari will field Gerhard Berger and Ayrton Senna as their drivers. The Prancing Horses offered Senna the biggest bag, so he gets to drive for F1's winningest team in an F1 Impractical Jokers reunion run. Senna's absence at McLaren is filled by their 1995 test driver, Jan Magnussen. Eddie Irvine stays at Jordan for a year or two, so instead of sticking it out with Giovanni Lavaggi, Minardi signs Giancarlo Fisichella to drive for them full-time. Without a Jordan ride, Martin Brundle takes a ride at Footwork Arrows to race alongside Jos Verstappen, since nobody should have to suffer through the Ricardo Rosset experience. Back on the Forti front, Diniz doesn't leave for Ligier, and Pappas stays too. Vincenzo Sospiri, reigning F3000 champion, gets snubbed again. On the track, Forti scores his first podium, as Pappas finishes third at that year's Monaco Grand Prix. Forti Lambo scores the Best of the Rest award, finishing fourth in the Constructors' Championship ahead of both Ligier and Jordan. As for how the Michael does, he drags that Ligier car kicking and screaming to multiple points finishes and even a win at the aforementioned Monaco Grand Prix. In '97, things get even nuttier. World Drivers' Champion Damon Hill still leaves Williams the end of the season, but not because of Heinz-Harald Frentzen. For 1997, Williams fulfills a deal they wished to make in the real world but was shut down due to contractual obligations. In a move that leaves European racing pundits scratching their heads, Williams rolls up to Albert Park with a lineup of Jacques Villeneuve and one Greg Moore. At McLaren, J-Mag has bloomed into what everyone thought he would be, scoring a bunch of points and even winning a race or two, so he gets to stay as Mika Häkkinen's wingman. Eddie Irvine stays at Jordan, which means Michael Schumacher takes the ride at Sauber, which went to Nicola Larini IRL. Heinz-Harald Frentzen also stays at Sauber for another year. To replace the Michael at what used to be Ligier and what is now Prost GP, they signed the previous year's Formula 3000 runner-up, Kenny Breck. Alexander Wurz gets a start at Tyrrell alongside Jos Verstappen. Mika Salo drives alongside Ricardo Rosset at the not as unfortunate but still terribly unlucky MasterCard Lola team. They run the whole season with Salo's Nokia money helping them out, but they don't score any points. The brand spanking new Stewart Grand Prix team snatches up the World Drivers' Champion. Damon Hill will race in the tartan and white alongside Rubens Barrichello. Vincenzo Sospiri finally debuts in Formula 1 with Arrows. On the Forti Lambo front, Pedro Diniz also joins Arrows, so they sign rookie Jarno Trulli, who doesn't get his start with Minardi here. Minardi signs Tarso Marquez to drive full-time alongside Ukyo Katayama. Since Forti is now on its own as a Lambo-powered entry, they now get the best possible engines. While Forti does not yet win its first race, it ramps up the amount of podium finishes, and they finish P3 in the Constructors on pure consistency alone, beating McLaren by the skin of their teeth. With this amount of success, you would probably see Forti in some state today as a team in Formula 1. Alright, I think we've dwelled on this enough. Time for the credits. Guido Forti was last involved in racing in 2003, running a team in Euro Formula 3000, which evolved into the Ardo GP World Series, which merged with the Boss GP Series. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 72. Pedro Diniz would turn into one of the F1 drivers of all time. He scored a grand total of 10 points in the era where only the top 6 scored points. He left Formula 1 after 2000 and is now a partner with his dad's supermarket chain and owner of a dairy farm with his wife. 1995 would be Roberto Moreno's last year in Formula 1. He raced in kart from 1996 to 2001, grabbing a top 3 finish in the 1996 US 500, 2 wins, and a best finish of 3rd in the standings for Pat Patrick. Andrea Montermini never raced in Formula 1 again, but he did a lot of sports car stuff in the years since. He's won his class in the International GT Open 5 different times. He's still active today, racing GT3 cars in the Michelin Le Mans Cup. Luca Badoer would spend 13 years as Ferrari's test driver, finally getting his time and good equipment at the age of 38 as a stopgap while Felipe Massa recovered from his crash at Hungary. He ran 2 races, scored no points, and was replaced by Giancarlo Fisichella before the season ended. And so that marks the end of Forti's time in the sport, but that does not mark the end of this series. Next up is one of my favorite team stories to learn about and tell about. In the coming weeks, we'll cover the story of Simtech. I have been Bobcat205, and thank you for watching. See you next time!